Tighten those laces, straighten that headband. It is time for CHGO Marathon, a podcast about the culture, community, and challenge that surrounds the world's fourth largest marathon. CHGO Marathon is brought to you by Goose Island, the official beer of CHGO Sports, and the beer you'll be drinking when you cross that finish line on October 8th. Find one of their Chicago locations when you get here at gooseisland.com/locations. What's up, everyone? We are 26 days away from the 2023 Chicago Marathon. I am Kevin Kaduk, head of content here at CHGO and a 2023 entrant into the Chicago Marathon. Been having a lot of fun doing this podcast. Recommend you go check out some of the past podcasts if this is your first time. We've had a lot of interesting guests, from race director Kerry Pinkowski to former Chicago Cubs pitcher Ryan Dempster. And today we have another interesting guest, and I've been looking forward to talking with him for a long time. His name is Andrew Suozzo, and he was a professor at DePaul for 33 years. He is the author of The Chicago Marathon, one of the definitive works of the Chicago Marathon history, published by University of Illinois Press in 2006. More importantly, he is also going to be racing on October 8th in Chicago. He is 77 years old. He'll be one of the older runners in the 47,000 person field, but he'll also probably be a little bit faster than me. So looking forward to talking with Andrew. Andrew, you're joining us from California. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm enjoying the California weather and looking forward to our interview.
Yeah, so you were a longtime Chicagoan. You taught at DePaul, and among the things you taught a lot of different things, but one of the things you did teach was a course on the Chicago Marathon, because you were really interested in just kind of the structure and the history and how the Chicago Marathon became the Chicago Marathon. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, but and that's why I originally reached out to you, because I wanted to talk to you about the history side. But then when we were emailing, you also mentioned that, hey, you're going to be racing in the Chicago Marathon for your fifth time, I think you said, and you're coming off of a great 2022 in which you won your age group in the Los Angeles, Tucson, and New York marathons. So first off, congratulations on that. And now you're coming back for more in Chicago. So how is your training going?
My training's fine. It's on schedule. I would like to be running a little faster. I think Chicago is going to be super competitive, and I'm not expecting the same results as I had last year, but I'll just be happy to be part of the race.
Yeah, so you've mentioned that when we've kind of talked before, that it is going to be a competitive field. I think you said the big runner Gene Dykes is here, so that's kind of like one of your big competitors. But is there something that about the Chicago Marathon course that attracts more runners in your age group than other marathons?
Well, this year it's the premier race of the Abbott World Marathon Majors. And so for that reason, you're going to have not just professional competition that's at the highest level, but you're going to have really the fastest people in their age groups from 40 years up in the Abbott competition. There are slices of 5-year age groups, so that goes all the way up to 80 plus. So that's going to draw a lot of exceptional people. And as you mentioned, Gene Dykes, who is, I think, the fastest man in the world in that age group, and so much faster than anybody else, is illustrative of the kind of appeal that the marathon has. Also, Chicago is a wonderful place for a PR, and I'm looking forward to finally running a flat race since I've returned to marathon running as of last year. It's a wonderful course, so that also attracts people all the time.
Do you have a target time in mind?
Yes. Once upon a time, I'd be aiming at a sub 3. Now I'm aiming at a sub 4. How we do. I'll be very happy with 3:59. So.
I love that. So yeah, I think in Tucson and LA, you were kind of right around like 4:02, 4:04.
Yeah,
so.
4:04. No, LA was terrible. I don't know how I.
Oh, Tucson and New York. Yeah.
It was New York. Yeah. But I'm just hoping I have no cramps this time. If I don't, I probably won't have any trouble with that goal. We'll see.
Yeah. So I want to get into a little bit about your running history, and I know that front runners plays a part in that. But can you tell me just a little bit more, kind of about what it's like to train in your 70s? Again, you're 77 years old. You really got into competitive racing as a younger man, although you were 50. What is it like now? Like what's different than maybe 10, 20, 25 years ago?
I lay off of the speed work in general because I seem to have a great facility for injuring myself when I do that. I Other than that, especially for marathons, I don't find that there's that much difference. The
Yeah.
mileage is still my mileage is a bit lower. Like now, I'll do only say 45 or 46 miles a week. When there was a time when I approached 60 or even 70 when I was in my early 50s when I was really into it.
hmm
But,
And
but yeah.
there was time where you thought maybe when you hit 75 that you would maybe just do half marathons or 10Ks, but you kind of just wanted to keep going, I guess.
Well, actually, in my early 50s, 60s, excuse me, I stopped running marathons because I was getting injured all the time. And I
Mm.
took off for 10 years. And I just ran the LA Marathon out of curiosity because I had run two very good half marathons shortly before that. And I had a very disappointing time. I had to walk a good deal of the race because of cramping, but to my astonishment, I won my age group, and I won with an hour's lead on the runner-up. So I thought,
Wow.
maybe I should reconsider, and that's what brought me back to running. I don't know how long this will last. I thought I'd
Yeah.
stop running entirely at 75, but there doesn't seem to be a closure at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk with your doctor, I mean, what does he or she say?
Well, since I've been moving a lot, I have different doctors. My doctor in San Diego, I think, enjoyed the fact that I was a runner. He would check my times and that. This was before I went back to marathons. And my current doctor feels that marathons are unhealthy, but that I enjoy doing them and I should do so.
Right.
And I'm not sure about the health or harmfulness, healthfulness or harmfulness of marathons, but it's
Mm.
just something I like to do. So I continue.
As long as you enjoy doing it. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that seems like a great thing. Um, Again, you kind of got a late start on marathon, like you
Mhm.
started when you were like, what, 50? Can you kind of take us
Just
through that?
before, yeah, actually, I'd run in high school and I was a fairly good runner then. But in those days, nobody really thought much of continuing running. It was something you did in high school track or maybe college. So I went back to running by accident in my 50s at 49 because I had lost a lot of weight. I'd gotten quite chubby at one point, and I was regaining it while I was at a seminar in Paris. We were eating far too well, and I declared a state of emergency, and I started running in parks, and that enabled me not to gain the weight back again. And when I came home, a friend said, "Oh, you should come and run with us, come to Front Runners, etc." And
Mm.
I said, "I don't want to do that. There are going to be all these young runners, and I'll be eating their dust, and I'll just make a fool of myself." And he said, "Oh, come on." And so I ran with the group, and I noticed that I was probably in the top third of the people who were running. And I thought, "Yeah, you can continue." And I just got more and more interested. Then a few weeks later, I ran the Motorola half. Did okay, 132 or something. And
Hmm.
then I decided I wanted to run Chicago before I turned 50. And against very good advice, not to do so, I did. And
Right.
I got through it and I qualified for Boston on my first try without training at all properly. So I broke all the rules and everything worked out. So from then on, I was sort of hooked on running and marathon running
So
too.
yeah, that's just crazy to me. I think you told me that you ran a 3:21 in your first marathon with not a lot
Hmm.
of training, not a you hadn't been doing it for a long time. Is it just something about kind of your will or disposition that you were wired to do that?
I think, we have certain abilities that come that aren't earned. We're just born that way,
Yeah.
and so I have pretty strong will and I can persevere a lot. And I was just curious. I had
Mhm.
only run 7 miles as my longest distance before running the Chicago Marathon. And I thought, I used to run it almost every day, but I thought the only way to face this incredibly long race would be to divide it into portions of 7 miles. And if I got to mile 21, I'd get through the rest. And that's what happened. So. But I was very nervous when I did it. I was terrified of hitting the wall, and which didn't happen. I
Yeah.
asked somebody about mile 20. I said, "Aren't we supposed to hit the wall?" And this person said to me, "If you haven't experienced it, it doesn't exist." And I thought I liked that response, and I just went on to the end of
Well,
the
as
race.
a first timer myself, I really hope that wall doesn't exist. I'm probably sure that it will, but hopefully I can maybe power through it. So um, we'll
I
see.
bet you will.
Yeah.
Just keep going and ignore it, and if slow down if you need to, but you'll finish.
Well, I'll remember this conversation and I'll say Andrew said there's no wall, so it doesn't exist. So maybe we'll see each other out there too, which I think would be cool. But
That's quite possible.
I think you're going to be a little bit faster than me, so we'll see.
Well, I just have to find you out of about 47,000 people, so that it's a
Yeah,
small
yeah.
challenge in itself. Yeah.
That'll be interesting. So you were actually inducted into the Chicago Area Runners Hall of Fame in 2015, and you've also been active with Front Runners, which is one of the premier LGBTQ runner slash walkers groups.
Right.
What about like how did you get involved with that, and what about like, how much has that added to your running experience?
Well, both Kara and the front runners have added a great deal to my running experience. Kara, of course, was restricted to Chicago, but it put me in contact with very much larger running community.
Hmm.
I met so many people who were interesting human beings and fabulous runners. The men who were my competitors in whatever age group I happened to be at the time were usually good friends. So it was a very friendly competition, and it was a wonderful way of connecting with the very large runner community that exists in Chicago. For
Hmm.
front runners, I got started with them, and because there are chapters all over the United States and much of Western Europe and in Australia, it's a very easy way to do running, traveling, and connect with people who are running and who have other connections to you. So I've always found that a wonderful social network. And in general, it stimulates my running because they're really strong runners, and I try to emulate them or keep up with them. In many cases, the older I get, the further behind I find myself. But
Hmm.
it just provided an enormous social network of very well educated, very thoughtful, very kind people. And it just added a tremendous positive dimension to my life. When
Yeah.
I'd be in Paris, friends would ask me, "How do you know so many people?" And I knew a lot from work. Because that was my field was French, but I
Hmm.
also sort of doubled my social network just by running with the Paris front runners. So I've benefited enormously from both running groups, and I think most people who run in any kind of club, like road runners, etc., would probably have a very similar experience.
Sure. So Front Runners has had a very big presence with the Chicago Marathon. You know, for
Yes.
years, they've just had such a great aid station.
Hmm.
What like from your viewpoint, like what have they added to just the kind of general culture of the Chicago Marathon?
Well, a great deal of fun and humor. They used to win all the prizes. I don't think they give prizes in the marathon anymore for aid stations, but
Yeah.
you really have a chance to see, the drag dancers and that, which a lot of people stop and enjoy or laugh at. Even Dina Castor apparently cracked a smile when she ran past their aid station some years ago. The I think it's just a kind of very, very reliable, very well organized, and very entertaining aid station is what I would
Mm.
say about it. So they've always been a linchpin there. And of course, one of their former presidents is David Reithofer, is the coordinator, or at least I forget his official title, but he organizes all the volunteers, or at least he did at one point through the entire marathon. So if you would, there's a personal contribution, a commitment from that club to the marathon that's very, very strong and very old at this point.
I think you actually wrote in the Chicago Marathon that the aid station came so early in the race that a lot of the drag performers were able to then come down to the finish line, and a popular attraction would be then the finishers would then get to take pictures with people, as they came in. So
yes, I have to admit that a lot of people enjoy that. My own attitude is probably not typical. I run past aid stations and pay minimal attention because I'm in a hurry to get to the end. But for those people who are doing a more leisurely marathon, they have the option of seeing all these wonderful displays. There's the front runners, but there's also the Elvis display from Fleet Feet, and things like groups like the Chinatown, the Dragons, and all the rest. So it actually is quite a visual spectacle for anybody who is not too concerned on time and who can slow down to watch.
I'm looking forward to it, but there's a little part of me that says am I going to be overstimulated just from all of it? And some people have asked me, am I going to, what does my iPhone playlist look like? Am I going to be listening to music? And I know it's a long race, and at some point I may pop my headphones in, but for some of it, I just kind of think I just want to take it all in. So I'm looking forward to those aid stations. But of course, again, like you said, you want to be able to get through them. And I think we all kind of know, you don't want to go to the first person at the table. You kind of want to go around the pack and get those people who are still handing out the stuff at the other side of it. So
it's a lot wiser, and it will make some volunteers very happy who are standing there with their glasses of whatever it is, Gatorade or water, and missed. So that could be frustrating for them. I think that a lot depends on what kind of personality you have. I actually am pretty much a cocooned runner, so I'm in my little space, and actually I don't like a lot of noise. So I
don't know if the Chicago Marathon's for you then. I don't know.
Well, any urban marathon requires noise tolerance, so at times I draw energy from the crowd, but sometimes I just want peace and quiet. When I was running in New York and I went over the one bridge, I forget the name, which one it is. It's not besides the Verrazzano Narrows. That's very high. It's sort of midway through the race. There were no people on it, and I enjoyed the silence for a while. Then I went back to the noise, and that was fine. And of course, the finish is very exciting with thousands of people cheering, and you finally see the jumbotron with telling you what your time is and all of that. So yeah,
that's I'm excited to see all that. When was the last time you ran the Chicago Marathon? Do you remember?
About 10 or 11 years ago. So 20. So it must have in the fairly well. See, whatever it's 2023, so it must have been around 2010 or something. I'd have to look it up. I don't have my running file with me right now.
So what specific to Chicago, like what do you love most about the Chicago Marathon, I guess?
The fact that it's so flat. I don't know what I love most, but also actually the setting is magnificent. I love the start in Grant Park with all the skyscrapers, and the finish too. You get that. You really have the sense of the majesty of a great city, and running up all the way to Lincoln Park. The scenery is striking, and the park itself. But I think it's the start and the finish of the marathon with the setting, which is so perfect. It's really hard to match that anywhere.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a first-time Chicago marathoner that's, again, specific to Chicago?
Specific to Chicago, I'm not sure, or just enjoy the sights.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything about the course that people should kind of, you know what I mean? Like, okay, you got to watch this part of the course or that part of the course, or
I would say I like the downtown, but I like a lot. I mean, look for the aid stations like the Pilsen station with, the Mexican American contribution to the race, the Chinese contribution, and all of the others too. But some of them will be specifically very entertaining, and I think I would say enjoy the scenery because it really is a very scenic course, and there's just a whole lot to see and get a sense of the unit and of the scope of the city and its variety when you're on.
yeah.
Mm.
All right, so let's get a little bit into the history of the Chicago Marathon. As I mentioned
Okay.
before, at DePaul, you taught a course on it for I think 5 or 6 years, and
Yeah.
you were really interested in the structure of it. And the thing that kind of really strikes me and what interests me about it is like it's own machine inside of this, machine that is the city of Chicago too, right? So there's like these two, and they kind of work in concert with each other, but. Um,
Mhm.
it didn't always start out that way. It started off in the late 70s. Can you kind of take us through that? There was kind of some
Well,
murky beginnings and
there's a lot of murkiness, but there are sort of two groups that converged or diverged, depending on whose account you're in. And there was a group at the Y with Wendell Miller, Wayne Goldner, Sharon Meyer, et cetera, who were planning a marathon, I guess in 1976. And then there was also Lee Flaherty and his and a lot of people in Flair Communications. And Lee had been, I think, trained by Wendell Miller for the Boston Marathon. Lee was a very fine runner, and he
Mhm.
was passionately interested in the marathon. So both of them, um, both groups were either simultaneously planning together or planning separately this marathon. The I know early on people were surprised in, I believe it's 1977, the Ravenswood 10-mile race drew something like 1,000 people when they were only expecting 200 to 400 at the most,
Wow.
maybe less than 400. So that stimulated everyone. They thought, we can have a marathon. There's that much interest, and depending on whom you talk to, like Dr. Neskin of the Y Group said that he had talked to Mayor, I think Mayor Blandick, no, sorry, Rich Daley, well,
The older one,
which is
yeah.
the Daley, Mayor Daley's brother, about
Okay.
getting naming rights to the marathon. But people from, I think Tony Balassa from Flair said that, well, Lee had already spoken to probably Ed Kelly about the permit, etc. There's a lot of history in mistaken history. I even followed an earlier account that said that Ed Kelly was opposed to the marathon, but he was not. In fact,
Hmm.
he was a runner himself, and somehow that it's too good as there was some opposition within the park department, but it wasn't from Ed Kelly. And But it makes too good a story about him viewing the marathoners as a bunch of unwashed hippies who wanted to invade the park and not allowing them in. But that simply is not the case. And the mayors from the beginning, Mayor Blandick was very much in favor of the marathon, and the marathon always had the support for the mayors. But in any case, by for 1977, there were even disputes about who was actually the race director. The pamphlet says it was Wendell Miller. The Dr. Nequin, excuse me, was the advisor. Sharon Meyer did the recruitment, but so did people from Flair, and on and on. And Coach Bill Leach did some recruitment too. In fact, a lot, I believe. So it's, to me, still, I would be very hesitant about assigning the unique prize of creating the marathon. I think they were all very instrumental and all very
Right.
generous with their time, and of course, Lee Flaherty's money made it happen, and that was an extraordinary contribution on his part. So he was really in there, and in a sense, I would probably call him maybe the primus inter pares, or the foremost founder among the founders of the marathon.
Right.
Um, and then the next year was filled with controversy because there was a huge clash between the people's marathon runners and business interest, as it was viewed at the time. When
Right.
in 1978 they jacked up the entry fee from $5 to $10. How we would all like to complain about that now.
That's crazy. So obviously, like in the late '70s, it was way more of a niche sport.
Yeah.
You probably had a lot of aldermen in neighborhoods saying, "Hey, you're not going to get control of our streets for this." Not as many competitors. Um, Today, it's 47,000 people. It's a gigantic economic engine. Aldermen are happy to have the crowds in their neighborhoods, supporting local businesses and getting people out there. How did exactly what really kind of spurred all of that along, and when do you think that really happened?
Well, there are a whole lot of factors that were converging in the 70s to make people interested in marathons. And even the first Chicago Marathon had over 4,000 runners. And I think it was the second largest marathon in North
Yeah.
America when it started. But what I think happened was a big sociological shift. The marathon, the whole health and fitness movement, which was in marathons fueled by Frank Shorter's victory in the Olympics, I guess in the 70s, the emergence of New York, which was actually cultivating the upper middle class in the city. That was catching on in Chicago, neighborhoods like Lincoln Park, and that the marathons transitioned from what had been a very small race of professionals, because there was a Chicago Marathon way back after the first Olympic marathon in 1896, and there were
Wow.
several in many major cities, but they disappeared because they were not really, I think, except for Boston. They really were not attracting a mass participation. They were really professional marathons. The newer marathon that emerged appeared to appeal to people. Well, it appealed to women with Jane Benoit Samuelson's success at the Olympics.
Hmm.
It appealed to people who were getting older, approaching 40 or 50, and that who wanted to prove that they were still viable. It appealed to the urban middle class and upper middle class that wanted to sort of have a an urban stage to perform on and to get the ovations of the crowd, and it also fit their lifestyle. It's not a surprise to me that the sponsors, the title sponsors, major marathons now tend to be banks, because they sort of mirror the attitude of a certain upper middle class person: discipline, long range planning, realizing long range goals, and that it sort of fits into a strange, not a strange, but into a sociological pattern. So that sort of interested people. The fact that the marathon started attracting world records in as early as 1984. You had the first world record there with what's his name, Steve Jones, and that started to contribute to things too. And of course, by uh, 1999, you had Kanushi's second world record at Chicago, and then a year or so afterwards, Dereba's women's world record, followed by Paula Radcliffe's world record at Chicago. So there was a lot of prestige accruing to the race. But I
Hmm.
think it's a change in lifestyle, a change in what people valued. The fact that the marathon became a mass event, sort of like a carnival that united the city. The marathon is I think, at least two separate events. It was always a professional competition, but when it started to become a mass competition, it really was something that anybody who wanted to do it could do it. The idea of having a huge challenge, a sort of epic challenge without going to war or risking your life, etc., and
Yeah.
realizing something very physically difficult. So all of that was feeding into the 80s, and I think contributed to the marathon's explosive growth now as a mass phenomenon.
So I had Carrie Pinkowski in here a couple of weeks ago, and we kind of talked about some of the other factors that kind of fed into the growth of the Chicago Marathon specifically. And one of them was one, being in the middle of the country. Two is the flat course. Three is just being able to have a really big field. What about Carrie? You know, obviously, I wasn't going to ask Carrie this because it's hard to talk about yourself,
Yeah,
but Carrie took over in the early '90s, and obviously he's
right.
been the lifeblood of this whole thing. How much would you assign to him?
Well, I would say that the movement was happening in the 80s, but I think Carey was tremendously influential in the revival of the marathon, in bringing Cara into the marathon because Cara was formed in reaction to the second Chicago Marathon.
Right.
And in essence, he was able to really bolster community participation from all the running clubs. He was skilled in the recruitment of runners. And essentially, I think probably any reasonably competent marathon director would have been able to do things with Chicago, but Kerry was way beyond that. He had the charisma, and he also had the know-how in selecting relatively unknown runners to come and race. He's as a professional, former professional runner, he understands running from the inside, but he also understands the various communities that are interested in racing, and so he's an exceptional director. I think an extraordinarily qualified race director.
So it's obviously one of the world majors, and it enjoys a prestige, and it's talked about in
Yeah.
the same breath as Boston, New York, Berlin, Tokyo, London. Was there any spot where maybe it could have become somewhat of a lesser big city marathon? I mean, not to say that the Los Angeles Marathon is a lesser marathon, but it's not a world
Mm,
major. What
exactly.
is there any point where it could have been something lesser, you think?
Oh, very early on, when Beatrice withdrew its sponsorship,
Hmm.
and there was a year's hiatus, they could only have a half marathon. They didn't have money. Then Heilemann came in, they had money again, but it took a
Yeah.
while to rebuild and then, of course, the Heilemann scandal and the firing of Bob Wright, etc., who was a good recruiter. Well, actually, that was earlier with Beatrice. In essence, I think Chicago could have lost it in the 80s because of sponsorship issues, and then without the sponsorship because of the inability to recruit really top runners. At one point, it had smaller prizes than Minnesota and
Wow.
Minneapolis and St. Louis. So the mid 80s, late 80s, and into the early 90s was probably a crisis period. And
Hmm.
it could have just lapsed into a significant but not major world marathon, as others like LA are. So,
Right. I don't know why I singled out LA, but we got to claim
uh,
superiority on LA with something, right? So,
well, I wasn't too thrilled with its course, which I found rather difficult. But
yeah.
the it is a little surprising though, because it's the second largest city in North America, and yet it doesn't. It has never become a world marathon major. So I think a major world marathon. So I think that that may have something to do with. Well, I don't know the race director. I don't want to say that that's the fault. I would say it's a mystery to me why it's not
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Has the course in Chicago stayed relatively the same over the years, or has it kind of changed drastically?
It's changed a bit since I started running it, and it changed. It's I think it was always a sort of buckle course, so you went through a lot of neighborhoods. It was never restricted the way New York was to Central Park.
Hmm.
I think I talk more about tweaks to the course, like it. In 1999, or maybe I believe in 1999 still, and certainly a bit earlier, you ran north when you were coming back through the park and through Grand Park, and now you run up the streets themselves, which is much better because the park trails were a bit narrower, as I recall, not really hilly, but they had undulations and a few rises in them. So I think that's been improved, much improved. You don't go under that tunnel in McCormick Field, which I think I may be confusing it with other races, but I think you had to go up that way too. But essentially, it's the Michigan Avenue return that I think has been really the biggest improvement.
Gotcha. Where do you think the Chicago? It's the 45th running this year. Like, where do you think the Chicago Marathon kind of goes from here? Do you think they've kind of figured out most of? I talked with Carrie. I said, well, in the last 10 years, you had the two big challenges of one, security after the Boston Marathon bombing, and then, of course, with the pandemic these last few years. But like, are there actually any challenges you can foresee for a marathon like Chicago?
Well, maybe growth challenges,
Yeah.
And of course, there's always going to be the continued competition for world records. I mean, there's even a possibility that Chicago could get two of them this coming race. So much depends on weather and the individuals who could actually bring that off. We'll see. I'm not. I think Chicago sort of has arrived. It depends on whether we want to have 100,000 person marathon or a 50,000 or whatever, and then there'll be waves all day long. Of course, there are time limitations and weather limitations. The more people you have, the later the start for the people in the later corrals and in waves, and those people would have to confront more heat if it's a hot day, so that could be an issue. But there are always challenges. As far as terrorism goes, when I was writing my book, that was very much on my mind, but I chose not to mention it. Actually, the book, I think it was right. Now that I think of it, because I didn't want to bring the subject up, because I didn't want anybody to be inspired.
Give anyone ideas, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, obviously the security has added a different level, to the fan, the fan experience, the racer experience, what you have to go through. But at this point, it's necessary. So, but I think you bring up a good point, just kind of about the size of the field. I mean, we're gonna have 47,000 people in this year's race. I'm really interested to see what I've never, raced in any race anywhere close to that. Although sometimes you run these half marathons and 10Ks and they're crowded, but this to me is like a whole different thing. So I'm going to be interested to see like what 47,000 people feels like out there. And obviously you manage it with corrals and waves, but it's going to be interesting. I meant to ask you, which corral are you in? Where do you start off at?
I think it's E of the first wave. It's whatever the last corral of the first wave is, because they charitably put us old fogies in who were in the World Marathon Majors competition into the first wave. I don't think we deserve it anymore. There are times past when I was much further up, but not now. I was thinking of a different kind of challenge, but I don't know how this could be approached. And that would be a financial one, because the marathon has really become, because of cost, a middle class to upper middle class phenomenon. And it's actually become very expensive to, if you want to get the World Marathon Majors 6-race medal, you have to go to Berlin, you have to go to Tokyo, you have to go to London, etc. And so I don't know if there's any escape from the escalating costs, but I wonder how many really extraordinary runners don't run because they don't have the means to compete. Of course, it's a lot cheaper.
I think that's a great point. I mean, obviously, it's the cheapest sport that you could possibly have, right? All you need are a pair of feet, but it could also be one of the most expensive things, right? Like, I mean, shoes cost money, gear costs money, flights cost money. So that to me, that's interesting. And maybe that's really a point of inefficiency that these race directors can attack. Okay, well, you're all competing for the same pool of runners who are known, and these people, but can you be a little bit more efficient about finding the unknowns and maybe finding some people who could actually come in here and the real true talents? Maybe that's, a way in, I guess.
Well, they do find a lot of them from Kenya and Ethiopia who are often poor. But I was thinking of a more general sweep. It's very difficult to do. Also, the cost of staging a marathon are very, very high.
Yeah.
The fees that one pays are still way below the actual cost. So
Mhm.
that another issue. And it's really, you can't do it without sponsors with their very, very deep pockets. And I was very curious about financing. How did LaSalle at the time determine whether it was getting its money's worth? And
Right.
there's no way you could guarantee that people were banking at LaSalle because of the marathon. But what they did know was that I think the cost of branding by being visible was about one third to one quarter in financing the marathon than it would be in actually paying for commercials on television. So there is a definite benefit for Bank of America and I guess it's Tata and all the rest to
Yeah.
sponsor these marathons.
Well, I do like that Old Style beer was once the sponsor of the marathon, and I mean I do love Goose Island. Goose Island is one of CHGO sponsors, and I'm looking forward to getting the finisher can. But it's also kind of like funny to think at one point they had gear with just you're gonna run the Chicago Marathon and then drink an Old Style, which is a very 80s experience.
Yes.
So
Well, I think Lisa Weidenbach, after she won, and she and the two other, runner-up and the third place person woman were very happy, and she said she thought they should all go home and drink a bunch of Old Style to host the sponsor. Of course, now alcohol is falling very much out of favor with as far as health advice goes,
mhm.
but one never knows. I'm not much of a beer drinker, but when I finished the last race I finished and I was having terrible cramps, I had to sit down at the finish. I couldn't, they wanted to drag me away, but I noticed I was sitting next to a keg of beer. The sponsor, I forget whose beer it was. I think it was Goose Island. So I thought I need an anesthetic. So
Yeah.
I gave myself a glass of beer, and that seemed to help. But that might have been my imagination. But I drank it very slowly as I hobbled away from the
I
finish.
was I was hoping you were going to say you did a keg stand after the marathon, which would have been really impressive. But
No.
so we're looking forward to welcoming you back to Chicago, Andrew. Do you have any other kind of special plans or things you want to check off while you're here?
Well, it's seeing lots of old friends,
Mm.
and just connecting with people in the running community, connecting with my former colleagues, and connecting with friends in general. I even do a New Year's Eve dinner for a group of people I always had over for New Year's Eve in the past, except because I don't come to Chicago on New Year's, I will be making it the day after the marathon, so I will
Nice.
have to still be in one piece because I'm looking forward to a four-course, very extravagant dinner to celebrate. And
Awesome.
also one other thing, I'll be meeting up with the some of the members of the Bright Forum, which is a group of older marathoners, 75 plus,
Hmm.
and we will have a little dinner afterward, well, a nice dinner afterwards. I think we're going to Piccolo Sogno, and I know we're going to it. But the main question for me is how many of them will actually place and be placed in a situation of conflict with the awards ceremony, which is from 6 to 8 p.m. from Abbott, which is exactly the time I picked much earlier for
Okay.
our dinner. So we'll see. Anyway, but I'm very much looking forward to being back in Chicago. I enjoy the energy. I enjoy the social connections. And just all the memories. And I'm a little bit intimidated by running the marathon, but I'm looking forward to doing it.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how you finish, and maybe I'll bump into you at the expo or on the course or anywhere else. And if a listener sees Andrew out there, make sure you say hey, and make sure you check out his book, The Chicago Marathon, which I think I picked up on Amazon, University of Illinois Press. It's a really good look into a lot of the different aspects of the marathon. It's not just history and Chicago names, but also just kind of what goes into the media, what goes into the race director's job, and and the marketing. So definitely learned a lot from that. So Andrew, I want to thank you again for your time, and good luck on October 8th.
Okay, thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and good luck to you.
All right, appreciate it.
Hope to see you after the marathon. Bye.
All right, well, that was an awesome appearance by Andrew, and I've talked to so many different cool people here in this chase for the Chicago Marathon. It's really added a lot to my experience as a first-time entrant for the Chicago Marathon, and I want to thank everyone who's really taken the time. One person I didn't mention at the beginning of the show was Kofuzi, who's the YouTube star who just keeps on adding followers, and I know he's going to have a big meetup here in Chicago, and I know I want to do some sort of meetup here with CHGO Marathon listeners and the people that I've made friends with on Twitter and in our Discord lounge through CHGO. We're going to figure something out. We have to figure out quick because it's 26 days away, but I'm sure we'll be able to figure out something. Quick training update. I feel like things are going really well for me right now. 20 miler is coming up on Sunday with Kara on the lakefront. That starts at 6:30, so I'm looking forward to that. Just went through this last weekend. It was just your routine 14-mile run, which I never thought I would say 14-mile run is routine, but that one felt good. This morning I got out for 7 miles, and it was just fine. So am I a little worried about getting sick? I don't want to jinx myself, but it's like my kids are in school. Everyone's got these sniffles, and you hear, oh, maybe COVID's bringing up. So at some point I feel like, okay, maybe I'll have to avoid crowds. I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to know how other people are approaching that. But otherwise, my overall health is good. Nothing feels all that sore. I think I've just been kind of managing things correctly and eating well, and can't really complain. So I'm definitely looking forward to October 8th being here, because it takes a lot of time, marathon training. I think that's the one thing that would maybe discourage me from getting into this long term is just even if a 14-mile run is routine and you feel like you can do it, no problem. That's still 2 hours, 15 minutes out of my day being away from my family, not to say anything of the 18 or 20 mile runs. So I think that's the kind of part when you get into marathon running, you don't really realize is you do need the support from your partner and your kids. And I mean, even here at CHGO, I know people probably sick of hearing me talk about it, which is kind of a weird thing, but maybe after your first one, it's you probably do stop talking about it, and you certainly don't do a podcast about it. But again, I've been having a lot of fun with this, and I appreciate everyone listening. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure if you feel like donating to my run for Cal's Angels, just crossed, I think, $3,200. I'd like to get to 5,000. I think that'd be really cool. That's a pediatric cancer charity that's been close to my family and helped my little cousin Ben out as they go through a leukemia battle. So it's really been cool to get their name out there as well. So
Kevin, quick question here from the producer.
Okay, we got a question from Jake.
So Andrew had mentioned he started later in life with the marathon. Do you see this because you're so busy right now with work and personal life stuff with your family and everything else?
Yeah.
Do you see accomplishing this goal this year and then maybe circling back to this down the road when you have more free time, when you are in your 50s or
yeah,
late 50s?
I could see that. I think the wild card for me is Andrew didn't kind of touch on this, but Andrew's a smaller guy. Andrew is 5'2" and he weighs 120 pounds, which is a lot easier to be a runner like that. I'm 6'3". Right now I weigh 226, 227. I don't know if my knees and hips are going to last that long, right? So to me, it's I don't know if this could be a really long-term thing. I certainly don't think I'm going to be doing it when I'm 77 years old. But I mean, I know I haven't really beat up my knees and legs too much. So I think I do have maybe another good 10 years of it, but I do just enjoy the actual getting into your own head part of it. And the one thing Andrew mentioned to me when we were talking on the side last night is running is such a great community thing. And the one thing I hadn't considered is he said you really do not meet any runners who are not incredibly smart people. And I kind of thought about that, and it is kind of true. Like, you kind of have to be really methodical about this. You have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to be, just kind of have to like know about a lot of things. So I did think about that and thought about everyone that I've met so far, and it is kind of true. So I do like that part of it. And I mean, I tell you like one thing, Jake, like I'm a little worried about like October 8th is going to come, and then I'm going to be like, all right, I'm just going to take the next, month off, and that month will turn into 3 or 4 months because Chicago winter is going to be here, and you're not going to want to run outside. So
if that happens, just look at me and say, okay, no, don't do that.
I got to get you out for the CHGO Marathon next year.
I would gladly walk in something and start a journey that way. But yeah, we're all gonna be rooting for you and proud that you're doing it, and it's great to see everyone committed to this for the Chicago Marathon, and Goose Island being a part of that, and Andrew and all the great guests you've had. Like it's definitely really cool to see that community to have a place to kind of share that.
And there's been so many different types of people that I've talked to in so many different communities. I mean, he's a proud member of the LGBTQ community, and he talked about what that means to them. And, it means a lot to people in the city, no matter who you are or where you're from. So that's been cool. So, all right, we'll cut it here. We'll be back next week when our guest will be the guy who organizes the famous Pilsen stop aid station. So I'm looking forward to chopping that up with him. But until then, this has been the CHGO Marathon Podcast presented by Goose Island. I am Kevin Kaduk, and we'll see you at the starting line October 8th.